What happens when a voice, hidden in silence, finally dares to be heard? What happens when the world, so often deaf to the quiet dreams of the poor, is suddenly stopped in its tracks by a song too powerful to ignore? This story begins not under bright lights or grand applause, but in the dim corners of a small, forgotten town. There, in a crumbling house with peeling paint and creaking floors, lived a boy named Daniel. He was 13, with a face marked not by age but by burdens heavier than any child should carry. Daniel's world was simple and hard. His mother, Maria, worked double shifts in a diner, her hands raw from endless hours of serving plates she could never afford. His father was long gone, leaving behind nothing but memories too faded to warm the cold nights. Poverty was not just in the walls of their home, it was in the torn shoes Daniel wore, in the lunches skipped, in the quiet shame he carried to school. And yet, within that silence, Daniel carried something no one could see. At night, when the world was asleep, he would hum to himself songs that rose from his chest like prayers, fragile yet beautiful. Music was his secret escape, a place where pain turned into something almost holy. He never sang loudly. He never believed his voice mattered. But in those hushed moments, in the privacy of darkness, his soul reached for something greater. Sometimes, walking through town, he would watch people hurry, by faces hardened, eyes tired. No one noticed him. No one ever asked about his dreams. But in Daniel's heart, a small flicker remained. A dream of singing on a stage so big, the world would finally stop and listen. It was a dream that felt impossible, almost cruel in its distance. Still, it lived quietly inside him, because sometimes, the most fragile hope is the one that refuses to die. And Daniel, though poor and unseen, carried a hope that one day his voice would matter. Life has a way of testing the fragile. Daniel often felt like a thread stretched too thin, ready to break. His mother Maria loved him with all her heart, but love could not always protect a child from hunger or the quiet sting of being overlooked. She rose before dawn and returned after dark, her body aching, her spirit worn. She smiled when she saw him, but Daniel could see the exhaustion hidden behind her tired eyes. Maria believed in surviving, not dreaming. Dreams, in her world, were luxuries for the rich, and though she adored her son, she silently feared that encouraging his hopes would only lead to heartbreak. So she cooked what little they had, reminded him to study hard, and prayed that life would someday be kinder. But destiny often sends help in the most unexpected ways. For Daniel, that help appeared in the shape of Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris was a retired music teacher, gray-haired, gentle, and often seen carrying a stack of old books under his arm. He lived alone in a modest house, spending his days strolling through the park or sitting on a bench to feed the birds. Most people passed him by without much thought, but he noticed things others didn't. One afternoon, as Daniel sat on the park's edge humming softly, trying to drown out the noise of the world, Mr. Harris stopped. He listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't frighten the boy, he simply let the notes drift toward him. And in that moment, he heard something extraordinary. There was a truth in Daniel's voice, raw and unpolished, but real. It was the kind of voice that carried stories of longing, of pain, of hope. The kind of voice that could move hearts. Days later, Mr. Harris approached Daniel gently, not with judgment, but with kindness. He told him his gift was rare, that voices like his were meant to be shared, not hidden. At first, Daniel shook his head. How could someone like him ever be worthy of a stage? But Mr. Harris planted a seed, and seeds, once planted, have a way of growing. For the first time, Daniel dared to imagine, what if my voice could be heard? The day of the audition arrived like a storm Daniel never thought he would face. He stood at the edge of a world so much larger than his own, a place where dreams were either born or broken. The audition hall was nothing like the quiet corners of his small town. It was alive with flashing lights, bustling cameras, and voices buzzing with excitement. Hopeful contestants filled the waiting area, each one dressed in bright colors, carrying themselves with confidence. Some laughed, some stretched their voices proudly, others rehearsed with bold determination. Daniel, in his worn shirt and trembling hands, felt invisible among them. His heart pounded as he held the crumpled audition card tightly. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. He thought of his mother, who had kissed his forehead that morning, whispering that she believed in him, even if her voice carried more prayer than certainty. He thought of Mr. Harris, who had placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, telling him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to sing despite it. When his name was finally called, Daniel walked toward the stage. The lights above seemed blinding, the floor beneath him endless. The audience loomed in silence, a sea of faces waiting to judge, waiting to listen. And then there were the judges, seated like distant rulers. Their presence was intimidating figures of authority who held the power to change lives with a single gesture. They had seen thousands of hopefuls, heard countless voices. To them, Daniel was just another boy. Standing at the center, he gripped the microphone with trembling fingers. The stage seemed too big for someone so small. His throat tightened, and for a moment he feared his voice would fail him entirely. But then he closed his eyes. He remembered the nights when his songs had been his only comfort, the times when music had carried him through hunger and loneliness. He wasn't here to prove himself to the world. He was here because his soul needed to be heard. The first note rose, fragile, pure, a sound so delicate it silenced the room. The first note slipped into the air like a fragile bird set free. Soft at first, trembling with fear, but within moments it grew into something deeper, something that came not from the throat but from the heart. Daniel sang not just with his voice but with every wound he had carried. His song held the echoes of empty nights, the weight of hunger, the longing for a father who never returned, and the fierce love of a mother who gave everything she had. Each word trembled with truth, each note painted with emotion too raw to be rehearsed. The hall, once filled with chatter and restless movements, fell silent. Judges who had seen thousands of performances leaned forward, their eyes softening. The audience, strangers who knew nothing of the boy's pain, began to feel it as if it were their own. And then, something extraordinary happened. Tears welled in the eyes of people who had walked into the hall expecting just another performance. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, holding back sobs. A man in the back wiped his face quickly, unwilling to admit he was crying. Daniel's voice did not just sing, it healed. As the final chorus soared, the sound was no longer the voice of a poor boy but the cry of a soul refusing to be silenced. The notes rose higher, breaking through fear, shattering walls of doubt, echoing with the power of every dream too small to be noticed. And then, in a moment that would be remembered forever, one of the judges slammed their hand onto the golden buzzer. A golden light burst across the stage. Confetti rained down like a shower of blessings, falling on Daniel's shoulders, clinging to his hair, wrapping him in a crown he never thought he'd wear. The audience leaped to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying. Daniel froze, his small body trembling. His hands covered his face, unable to believe what had just happened. For a boy who had once sung only to the darkness, this was the moment the world finally listened. And in that storm of golden light, history was written. Backstage, Daniel stood trembling, still wrapped in golden confetti that clung to his skin like a dream refusing to fade. The roar of applause echoed behind him, but he could hardly breathe, hardly believe what had just happened. Moments earlier, he was a boy, no one noticed. Now, he was the boy who had made the world weep. The curtain pulled back, and through the haze of lights and chaos, his mother appeared. Maria rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, her arms wide open. She gathered Daniel into her embrace, holding him so tightly as though letting go would mean losing him to the dream that had just come true. Her voice cracked with emotion, whispering words that carried more love than he had ever heard. She was proud of him, proud beyond measure. For years, Maria had feared that dreams would only break them, that hope was a luxury they could not afford. But in that moment, watching her son wrapped in gold, she realized that his voice had never been a fragile dream, had always been his destiny.